on the writings of Shaul, who the world calls Paul. You might hear people say Paul, but we call him Shaul. And I want to say, I'm going to say a few things on tonight because it's important that we get an understanding. There's one thing that we have lacked down through the years, and it's understanding of Torah and understanding of those who wrote it. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, we've already had an understanding. We understood this a long time ago. We have evidence through the Ruach and through our life and everything. But we don't have a clear understanding of gospel, because as soon as you say gospel, and what gospel means is good news or good tidings. And there is good tidings of Yahushua Mashiach, but there was also good tidings that was given unto a nation. There was a good tidings that was given unto Yasharel as a whole. And that's why in Acts chapter 1 and verse number 6, when we had the ascension of Yahushua Mashiach, that's why those disciples that were with him asked him before he ascended up, are you going to restore unto Yasharel the kingdom now? And he says, it's not time for you to know when, the time or the season. So they were looking for the restoration of the kingdom of Yasharel. They were looking for the restoration of the nation because it was prophesied. It was prophesied. And we know that all prophecy has to be fulfilled. And so in our understanding of Torah and even of the what they call New Testament letters, but even our understanding of that, if you're being told, if your complete understanding is through the lens, through the eyes, through the lens, through the perception of a heathen nation and heathen people, then your understanding of Torah is going to be skewed. It's going to be off, because it's not easy for someone who's an adversary of Torah and the people to tell you the truth. Because then a lot of times they would have to prophesy on themselves, and they're not willing to do that. So they would rather conjure up and mix up and prepare a recipe for you that has half truths in it, partial truths in it, and not the full unadulterated truth. And so what we've been on, for me, for a number of years now, is to have a clear understanding, having a clear understanding of Torah from the beginning all the way to the end. And so that's the journey that we're on. Just kind of laying down a little work before we get started. So as we're coming up to Shavuot, having an understanding of what Shavuot is, also having an understanding of the teachings of Torah. And I'm going to say something. I think I might as well just drop it right now. I'll just drop it right now. You can actually make the kingdom and be pleasing unto Yah without the letters of Shaul. Without the letters of Shaul, you can still make it. Without the letters of Romans through Philemon, because I don't think Shaul wrote Hebrews, but without the letters of Romans through Philemon or Philemon, if you took those out, let's say you never read those. If you never read those, you could still make it. You could still make it. You could still make the kingdom. A lot of people, and what modern day Christianity have taught us, is you can't make it without Shaul's writings. And one thing that we have to understand and realize that, yes, Shaul was a chosen vessel, but he was a chosen vessel to go out to the Gentiles. He was a chosen vessel for that. So without Shaul, you could still make it into the kingdom if you understood the law and the prophets, if you understood the law and the prophets, you can make it in. So first, I want to go to the book of Acts, chapter 28, and verse number 17. Acts 28 and 17, because one thing that Shaul did, and I said 17. Let's go. I want to go down to 23. I'll probably come back to 17 because 17, Shaul let you know, and that'll probably be in this teaching a little bit, but in 17, he let you know he never he never went against the fathers. He never did. If people think that Shaul was a lawbreaker, he was not. He tells you in his testimony in the 17th verse, he says, I've never gone against the teachings of our fathers. I've never gone against that. So whatever they taught in the Torah and the prophets, Shaul lived by that. And so that's what he's saying in 17. And we can bring out some more of that to use to build the kingdom of Elohim and the testimony of Yahusha, the testimony of the kingdom and of Yahusha. What he used was the law of Moshe and the prophets. You can use the law of Moshe and the prophets and still be able to build the kingdom and still make it in. If I never read the book of Romans, I could still make it. Now we do read it because there's things that Paul says in Romans that deals with this. When he wrote the letter to the Romans, he dealt with this and the prophets. Because when you read Romans, there's a lot of the law of Moshe and the prophets in Romans. In fact, in all the letters that he wrote, there's a lot of that in it because that's what he used to testify of the kingdom and to persuade men. That's what he used. So I can, if I don't read Romans to Philemon, I can still make it. I can still make it. I can make it off everything else that was written. The handicap of a lot of people is they cannot make it without Romans. And many of them can't make it without Galatians. They just can't make it. As if Galatians is the whole totality of Torah. And it's not. It's not. So in Romans, let's look at what Shaul says in Romans 7 and verse number 14. Let's look at what he says. Romans 7 and 14. Because he's using the law of Moshe. And what does he say? For we know that the law is what? The law is spiritual. Everything from whatever Moshe wrote, from Genesis all the way to Malachi, all of that is spiritual. It's all Ruach. It's all Ruach. The problem is if you're just reading black print on white paper. That's the problem. Because what you read must become, it's got to be spiritual. I have to understand the benefits. I have to understand the plan. I have to understand that everything that is written in Torah is to address my Ruach. Is to address my Ruach. Not that he's changing anything, because even when we read Genesis and even when we read about the creation, it's got to deal with your Ruach. It's got to deal with that spiritual, the spiritual man. And if I can't read Torah and deal with my spiritual man, then you're going to miss the kingdom. You're going to miss it. What a lot of people have done is they don't want to read the Torah, and if they do read the Torah, they say, well, you're talking about the CHURCH. And that's just not true. That's just not true. So we know that the law, if I'm looking at the law, I have to get, what is it telling me for my Ruach? What is it telling me? The law and the law of Moshe is spiritual. Now, so he used the law of Moshe or Moses, and he used the prophets. Because even what's written in the historical record of Yasharel and the prophecy of Yasharel and of the prophets, all of that has to come to life. There's one thing, there's a principle that Shaul knew. There's a principle that he knew. In Matthew, Matif chapter 4 and verse number 4. And everybody who is a teacher of Torah, everybody who's a teacher of Yahushua Mashiach, anybody who's a teacher of Yahushua Mashiach, this is a principle. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of Elohim. That is a principle. So if I've got to live by that, and we eat to stay alive, stop eating, stop feeding yourself, eventually you might last 7 days without any food or water. You might last 7 days. Some of us might last a little longer. Now you can go a while without food, but you got to get some water in there, you'll bleed out. But if you don't feed yourself naturally, you're going to die. Because the physical food that you take and that you eat, it keeps that ruach that you have in you in your body. Because if you kill the body, that ruach is leaving. The ruach don't die, but the ruach leaves. The spirit leaves. He even tells us at the time of death, the breath of life, or the spirit goes back to Yah, your soul goes to sleep, and then your body goes back to the ground where it came from. So you have to keep that ruach inside me. I have to eat. If you want to have that life that Yahuwah is talking about, you have to take his word, all of his word. Not just the book of Psalms, not just the first 9 chapters of Genesis or Genesis 11 through 45, 46. I'm going to get all of Genesis except for when they go into Egypt. I'm going to cut it off. I mean, no. You have to take all of it, all of his word, every word that. So this is a principle that Shaul knew. That's why he used the law of Moses and the prophets. Another thing, I'm just kind of setting some things down. In Yahuchanan chapter 10 and verse number 34 and 35. Yahuchanan 10, 34, 30. And Yahusha answered them, is it not written in your what? I said ye are gods or Els. Now, was this written in Moses? Did Moses write this? You know who wrote this? It's in the book of Psalms. In the book of Psalms, chapter 82, he says, I've said unto you, ye are gods, but you're going to die like men. But ye are gods. So this is something that we could talk about at a later time. Who was he talking about when he said, you are gods? The point that I want to make out, if he called them gods or Els unto whom the word of Elohim came, and what? You can't break the scriptures. You can't break one script, one precept, one line. Here a little bit. Not one line or one precept can be broken. That's a principle. So every word that comes out of the mouth of Yah, none of it can be broken. So what if somebody comes by and tells you, oh, well, he meant that then, he don't mean that now. Oh, that's what they do a lot of times, especially in the circuses. Well, yeah, he stood for that then, but he doesn't stand for that now. He's got a new law. There's no new law. There's nothing new that's coming. Even King Shalom said there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing new. So we got something. No, you don't. You ain't got nothing new. This what we have and what was written, and even the prophet Daniel says, we're going to see the Ancient of Days or the Ancient of Times. He's going to reestablish what he had started with Yasharel. He's going to reestablish it. And we can prove it because the blood of the Mashiach and our Mashiach coming in the order of Melchizedek proves and confirms. That's the oath that Yah gave to us. I couldn't swear by any better, any greater. I swore by myself. And he gave us an oath, which is Yahushua Mashiach. He's the oath. So everything that was written aforetime, all of it has to come to pass. Because these scriptures cannot be broken. You ain't gonna break them. Shaul used Torah. He used the law of Moshe. That's what he used to build. He used the prophets to persuade men. So let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse number 21. Let's start there. Now he used law in Romans. He's using law in Corinthians. You'll find out through a lot of his writings, he's using law. Because that's all he had. And that's why I'm telling you, if I don't read Romans through Philemon, I don't have to read none of that. I can still make it. I can still make it. It's just that Shaul, he's writing to us about the law of Moses. Because the law has to become spiritual. Because it's got to feed my spiritual man. In the law it is written, with men of other tongues and other lips will I speak unto this people, and yet for all that will they not hear me, saith Yahuwah. Who knows where that's from? Notice now. So when we read Yahusha in Yahuchanan chapter 10, verse 34 and 35, when Yahusha says, isn't it written in your law? And he maybe I should have showed y'all where he quoted that, right? Okay, let's go to Psalms 82. Psalms 82. What is it, verse 5 or 6? Let's see. Okay, verse 6. This is the book of Psalms. I have said ye are gods, and all of you the children of the Most High. But ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. So this is a book of Psalms, or we call it in the Hebrew. What anybody know Hebrew? It's Tehillim. Tehillim. We say Psalms is Tehillim. So when you look at, usually when we say law, who do we think of? Musha. As soon as we say law, we think of Musha. They had the understanding, when you say law, not only are you talking about Musha, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, not only are you talking about that, but you're talking about Tehillim. You're talking about that, because Yahusha says, isn't it written in your law? Remember we read that? And he pulls out Tehillim. So let's go back to 1 Corinthians 14:21. So he says here, it is written in the law it is written. So we got the first 5 books. Then we got Tehillim, which is the Psalms, right? Now we're talking about law as being what? The prophets. Listen to what he says. In the law it is written, With men of other tongues and other lips will I speak unto this people, and yet for all that they will not hear me, saith Yahuwah. That's law. Wherefore, tongues are for what? Not to them that believe, but to them that, but prophesying. Because this is what he's doing. Prophesying serveth not for them that believe not, but it serves them that what? So where would that put you? Or actually, when he's talking to them, he's making a separation here. Prophesying is not for them that believe not, but for them that believe. So when I get into prophecy and prophesying, this is for those who believe. Because there's a lot of things in prophecy that talks about the restoration of Yasharel. Now, if you're an unbeliever, that doesn't mean anything to you. But those who believe and believe in the law and believe what is written, when we open up the book of the prophets and we start reading the prophets, oh, we're believers. I believe that. I believe in the restoration of Yasharel. I know for a fact the circus did not replace Yasharel. I know that for a fact. Well, let's see. Romans 11 and 1. Romans 11 and 1. Let's see what Paul believed. Shaul, let's see what he believed. I say then, hath Elohim cast away his people? So everybody that believes in the replacement theory, has Yah cast away his people? Yah forbid. For I am also a Christian and of the seed of Abraham of the tribe of Benjamin. He didn't say that? What? That's what a lot of people want. Hey, I'm a Christian. You won't find nowhere in Shaul's letters where he says he's a Christian. Nowhere. You won't find nowhere where he says he's a Christian. They were first called Christians where? In Antioch. And Christian means to be a follower of Christ or Christ-like. So everybody that breaks the Sabbath is not Christ-like. You're not Christ-like if you break the Sabbath. I can't be walking in Christ and break the Sabbath. Elohim have not cast away his people which he foreknew. That foreknew, this is where you get the word predestined when he brings it out in Ephesians. The predestined. And a lot of people say, I'm predestined. That means he foreknew you. Here he says, he have not cast away his people, which he foreknew. So who is he talking about? Well, he's talking about Yasharel. He's talking about Yasharel being predestinated. Yasharel he foreknew. That's what he's talking. That's what he's dealing with here. Israelite of the seed of Abraham, tribe of Benjamin. He has another opportunity. In fact, there's 3 places that I can think of, maybe 4. Maybe you might have more, but I know at least 3. In 2 Corinthians 11:22. 2 Corinthians 11:22. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Christians? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Is that what it says? Oh, this is his second time he had the opportunity to wear the title of a Christian. Second time. He says, I'm a Hebrew, I'm an Israelite, I'm of the seed of Abraham. Philippians 3, verse number 5. Circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Christianity, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Is that what it says? He's of the stock of Christianity? Oh, no. He says, I'm the stock of Yasharel. 3 times now. Now, you might find some more, but these are just 3 right off the top of my dome that I know he didn't. He had the opportunity, but he never did say it. As touching the law, a Pharisee. Now, nobody knew the law better than a Pharisee. In fact, they could memorize the law, but the law was only in a letter. It was never what Paul understood. It has to benefit you spiritually. And even Yahusha says, them Pharisees, they get up on Moses' seat every Shabbat day. He says, do as they say, but don't do as they do. Because they make outside the cup look so good, but on the inside, full of dead men's bones. They're just like whited sepulchres. Yahusha called all them religious folks serpents. He called them religious folks hypocrites. Now, if we say that about the circus, you better not be walking up in here calling us no snakes. Yahusha did. He called them folks, hey, y'all ain't nothing but a serpent, a snake, a hypocrite. Because if Yahusha was here, he wouldn't be in the steeple on the first day of the week. You won't catch him there. So if a Christ shows up there, they got another one. They don't have Yahusha, because Yahusha he did not break Torah. Listen what he said here. Concerning zeal, persecuting the circus, touching the righteousness, or actually persecuting the assembly, the congregation. That's what he calls it. Concerning zeal, persecuting the congregation. Touching the righteousness which is in the law, he was what? So he didn't break Torah. So if somebody says, I'm going to follow Shaul, well, you better be blameless when it comes to the righteousness of the law if you want to follow Shaul. So those are 3 places. So when Shaul taught, he taught the law of Moses, he taught the prophets. We see that in his writings. Let's look at Romans 7:1. Romans 7:1. Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know what? He's talking to those who know the law. I speak to them that know the law. How that the law hath dominion over a man as long as he liveth. That's why Yahusha said the scriptures couldn't be what? Can't be broken. So when he gave the law to Yasharel, they're bound by that law as long as you live. Now, what Shaul was talking about, he redeemed us from the law or the curse of the law. If you broke the law, I mean, you can't get out from under the law. But there was penalties for breaking the law. And some of them, you couldn't bring a sacrifice. Some penalties for breaking the law was death. There was no sacrifice. When King Daud committed adultery and had that man murdered or killed, there was no sacrifice he could bring for his sins. There was no sacrifice. But what did he experience from Yah? He killed his son, but there was no sacrifice, because usually if you break law, you could bring a sacrifice. But there was no children sacrifices. So Yah says that child's going to die. But there's no sacrifice. It wasn't a sacrifice for him, but the penalty was death. And King Daud says, if I could bring an offering, he says, I would bring it. But what was Yah looking for? He says it in Psalms Talaim 51. A broken heart and a contrite spirit, he's not going to deny. So we see Yah's mercy. We see his mercy because King Daud repented. He repented because no sacrifices was going to get him clean, getting right back with Yah. It was his repentance, and he experienced the mercies of Yah. So we know the scripture cannot be broken. So if the law was given to Yasharel, that can't be broken. So when Yahusha came and he died for us, it wasn't to make us lawless. It was to forgive us of the sins that we committed and put that in remission. So I don't keep sinning. I can't keep sinning if you want to make it in. So let's go back to, where were we? 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 21, 22. I think that's what I read. We're going to read down a little bit. If therefore the whole congregation be come together into one place and all speak with tongues, and there come in, you know what? Let's go to Isaiah where this is quoted, right? Isaiah 28, verse number 9. Is that it? Okay. We're going to read down. He actually quotes 11 and 12. In 1 Corinthians, he quotes 11 and 12. Whom shall he teach knowledge, and whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast. Now, the reason why, we can always read a little bit more scripture because we want to get the context. A lot of people say you pull scriptures out, but you don't use the context of the scripture. Well, that's what Shaul did. He just did it right here. He just pulled out, like we said, he just pulled these two out. He didn't deal with the whole context here. He just pulled these two out because he's trying to show you the benefit in the congregation, the benefit of the law, because it's not done away with. So the only ones who can understand doctrine are who? Those who are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast, which means you can't be a babe. In order to understand doctrine, you cannot be a babe. And we see that in Hebrews, right? The 5th chapter. He says, when you ought to be teachers, you should be teachers, talking about those Hebrews, because it was prophesied that they were going to be a light to the world. They're going to bring this out to the world. You're supposed to be teachers, but yet we got to teach you all over again, which would be the first oracles. The first oracles of Elohim. Because only those that can do this are those who can get meat. Because he says, if all you're doing is getting milk, you're just a babe. If I got to keep feeding you milk, you're just a babe. If I tell you, you don't have to read Romans through Philemon and you can still make it in, and folks start choking and dying and crying, and you're just a babe. You're just a babe. I can't give you no strong doctrine. What about all those people who never even read Shaul, who died about 66 AD, history tells us. And a lot of his writings he wrote when he was under house arrest, when he wrote to Timothy, when he wrote to Romans and Corinthians and them. He wrote under house arrest and that came towards the end of his life. What about everything that was up before then? Well, they was reading, they had to understand what this was talking about. It can't be a babe, for precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people. And this is what Paul is dealing with. He uses this to talk to the Corinthians, to explain to them congregational order. Order in the congregation when we come together. That's what he's dealing with. Well, let's go back to 1 Corinthians. I think that's what he's dealing with, right? 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse number 23. Let's see what he says. 1 Corinthians 14, 23. If therefore the whole congregation be come together, so he's dealing with congregational order, into one place, and all speak with tongues, and there come in those that are unlearned or unbelievers, will they not say that, hey, y'all mad? I don't know what y'all doing up in there. I went to a service, and everybody jumping around, everybody screaming, everybody speaking in tongues, all this stuff. Man, something's wrong with them folk. Them folk is mad. Isn't that what unbelievers, unlearned, going to say? They're unlearned in Torah. They're not even believers. They're going to think y'all mad. But if all prophesy, open up the book of the prophets and start reading. Because I can read the prophets and get an understanding now. Oh, there's still some dark things. There's still some things that has to be opened up because nobody knows it all. But I can open up the prophets and start reading the prophets and understand what he's talking about. But if all prophesy and there come in one that believeth not or unlearned, he is convinced of all, he is judged of all. And thus are the secrets of his heart made manifest. You make manifest the people of their hearts when you speak or prophesy. Open up the book of the prophets and read to them. You can see the secrets of their hearts. And thus are the secrets of his heart made manifest. And so falling down on his face, he will worship Elohim and report that Elohim is in you of a truth. Unless you're an unbeliever. Because you have some people come in, I don't care what he say, I don't believe it. Well then, when you begin to prophesy, open up the book of the prophets and read like he did, then you're not going to accept anything that is read. How is it then, brethren, when you come together, every one of you have a talim, have a doctrine, have a tongue, have a revelation, have an interpretation, scroll it up. Let all things be done unto edifying. If any man speak in a tongue, let it be by two or... You know, I said before, you really can't teach 1 Corinthians 14 in an apostolic Pentecostal church. They're not going to hear it. How dare, you know what they'll say? How dare you say that? Well, it's written. It's the letters of Shaul. If somebody's speaking an unknown tongue, let there be two or at the most three, and by course, let one interpret. So He gets over here, he's speaking in tongues. Okay, let me speak. Then somebody get up, they're speaking in tongues. You got to have an interpreter. Somebody stands up here and speaks, interpret it. Somebody else wants to speak in tongues. They stand up and speak, interpret. But if there be no interpreter, let them keep silence in the congregation and let him speak to himself and to Elohim. That means you do it in your Ruach. You do it in your Ruach. Am I making this up? Is this a book written by Richard? The Epistle of Richard Hazlett. I don't think that's what this is. No, this has been around for a long time. And I still will witness, not hardly that much anymore, but I have. And I kind of watch and, okay. They're going against the writings of Shaul. But you can't say anything to them because they'll make you feel like you ain't saved. But then when you go to the book and start reading it, that ain't what it says. What don't you understand about this? I think it's pretty clear to me. Let the prophet speak 2 or 3, and let one other judge. If anything be revealed to another that sitteth by, let the first hold his peace. So when you come into assembly or a congregation, and all it is just a bunch of hollering, a bunch of noise, and that's why I know if Shaul came to some of these, what you call churches today, and Yahusha, which they be looking like, what's wrong with y'all? All of that's out of order. It's all out of order. Order by chaos. That's what the people would say today. If Shaul and Keith and them showed up, Yahusha showed up, what y'all doing? I'm probably stepping on a lot of toes. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. That means you can control. If you are a prophet and your spirit revs up and you can control that. Spirit of the prophet is subject to the prophet. For Elohim is not of confusion. Anything that has confusion written all on it, Elohim is not of that. He doesn't have his signature on. He don't have his signature on anything that's confusion. When we come together and we start talking and we teaching and everything, there should be no confusion. We have things set up. You're going to do this here, and because he even tells us everything must be done at the end of this chapter. Everything must be done what? Decently, and it's written. So why is there all kind of stuff going on? You come there, what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen today. I'm just sure something might bust out. No. We, like he said before, what is this when y'all come together? Everybody got a song. My turn to sing. My turn to sing. My turn to sing. I'm preaching today. No, I'm preaching. I got a word. I'm preaching. And folks speaking in tongues everywhere. He go, what? What's going on there? Elohim's not the author of that. He didn't put his signature on that. Because you got some folks that they go to some of these assemblies and churches, and man, the Ruach was heavy in there. You don't know the Ruach because according to this, Elohim didn't put his signature on it. So if he didn't put his signature on it, I wonder who did. That's why it's so easy to deceive them. Hey, if I got you spinning like a top and lights and smoke and the organ and the drum beat and the bass player and folks running around. And if I got y'all doing that, oh, I can deceive them folks. They ain't got no order. You can get up here and say and talk about somebody's mama and talk about you going to hell, but as long as you got a bark and a foot stomp and all that noise come up, they can talk about you and call you a devil, and you say, amen, preacher. No, he said, I don't have nothing. That's my signature's not on that. It doesn't say they didn't sing. They did have songs. Even Yahusha at his last supper, he sang the hymn. I'd love to hear him sing. Oh, he probably had a decent voice. What are you talking about, a decent voice? It doesn't say he was a singer, but he did sing a song. But he wasn't sent to sing. So he was sent to minister and to be the offering. I'm going to give up my life for yours. And even Shaul, in this book here, he says, I was not sent to baptize. That's not my ministry. I'm not sent to baptize. Because he goes on to say, if I baptize y'all, some of y'all would say you was baptized in the name of Shaul. He says that in the first chapter of this book. Then he goes on to say, because I was not sent to baptize. So everything has its order. Everything has its order. We have to do things in order. And he will bless it. He will bless it. Let your women keep silent in the assembly. Oh, we better go on down here. Because I know a lot of people don't want to hear this one. Now, Shaul gets this from the law of Moshe. That's where he gets this from. Let your women keep silent in the church, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are to be commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the what? Well, I thought that was done away with. I thought Paul threw it away. Paul freed us. Paul emancipated us from the law. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Because he uses it too much in all his letters. He says, also saith the law. Uh-oh. Huh? And if they will learn anything, let them ask why would they ask their husbands at home? Because the husband's supposed to be what? They're covering, and he's the priest of the home. He's the covering of a woman is their husband. So if you don't have a husband, then it would be your father. And that's in Torah. And in fact, in the synagogue, but they didn't have a synagogue back in Moses and the prophets and everything. They would meet up in their houses, or they'll meet in the temple. But in the temple, you had a court where it was just the men, and then you had a court for the women. And the Gentiles were on the outside. There was a court for the Gentile, but that was outside. And we see that in the New Testament. You see it in Acts chapter 13. Because that was the time that all the Israelites gathered, and the Gentiles were on the outside, and they heard the preaching of Shaul. And so when that service was over, they went to Shaul and says, you got to teach us this. You got to teach us this. So it says the next Shabbat day, almost the whole city showed up. I mean, it's in Acts 13. For it is a shame for women to speak in the assembly. So you have a lot of people that break this. And they'll tell you, that's Old Testament. Paul emancipated us from that. Yeah, but that's what he's saying here. So your covering, or the covering, is the one that gives the authority. And what Shaul is alluding here when he talks about the law, you have to go to Numbers chapter 30. And you read Numbers chapter 30, and it deals with the woman and the daughter, and when they open up their mouth to make a vow and stuff like that. If the husband hears his wife make a vow, then when he hears it, he can disannul that vow. But if he don't say anything, then whatever she spoke, it's a vow unto the Most High. It has to be, you have to do it. But when Shaul had an understanding of Numbers chapter 30, you have to realize Shaul sat at the feet of who? Gamaliel. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel, who was, when Shaul says, I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees, Gamaliel was his teacher. So he sat at the feet of Gamaliel. He didn't sit at the feet of Yahusha. The ones who sat at the feet of Yahusha was Yahuchanan, Kepha, Yaakov, Matif Yahu. They sat at the feet of Yahusha, but not Shaul. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel. So Gamaliel was his teacher of the law and Torah. So what he understood of Torah, that's what he's writing about here. If any man think himself, oh, wait a minute. What came the word of Elohim out from you, or came it unto you only? Now he's going to deal with something. If any man think himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge that the things that are right unto you are the commandments of Yahuwah. So when he's writing everything up here, he gets it from law. These are the commandments of Yahuwah. If we were supposed to do away with this, if we were supposed to do away with Torah and do away with the law, you'd have to do away with Shaul's writings. And that's why I say I don't have to read his writings. I can still make it in. Let him acknowledge that the things that are right unto you are the commandments of Yahuwah. But if any man be ignorant, let him what? Let him be ignorant. If any man be ignorant, let him be ignorant. Because some people are just not going to accept it. They're just not going to believe it. So he says, well, if you're not going to believe it, just be ignorant. You guys going to come back on the Shabbat? Okay. So what he wrote unto the assemblies were commandments. He didn't go away from the teachings of Torah. Shaul knew better. He knew that. And that's why he used it when he built the kingdom, like we read in Acts 28 and 23, because that's all he had. But if somebody's going to be ignorant, let them be ignorant. Wherefore, brethren, covet to prophesy. And a lot of people say preach. But prophesying here, and what he's dealing with the prophets here, what did Shaul do? He opened up Isaiah, he read Isaiah, and he was able to expound from Isaiah. That was the prophesying. That's why we went back to see what he wrote in Isaiah. And whenever Shaul writes, we can go back to the Numbers. Even Moses was a prophet. So we go back to what he said, read it in his context, get an understanding. If you go back to read some of the prophets, you might ask yourself, how did Shaul see that? How did he see that? I read Numbers 30, and I'm going, how did Shaul see that? How is he able to use that and bring order into assembly? Because when they taught Torah, the woman's covering was the man. So they talked to the man. And then if the woman had questions, she'd have to go, honey, what did he mean by that? What did he mean by that? Now, if the man says, well, I don't know, then the man would have to go get an understanding. Well, the next time we meet, you better ask these questions because you have to get an understanding so you can tell me. But now, we don't have order like that. There ain't no order like that. Our homes are so dysfunctional. And the ones that are functional has less stress. I'm telling you, you live better if you're functional. Everybody has their order, everybody has their place. It's not a place of, I'm jealous because no, you didn't miss the whole thing. It's not there for you to be jealous of. It's the protector, the cover. He cares for you. He's accountable for the whole direction of his spouse, his Isha, and all the children they produce. So that the second and third generation looks up and sees order. This is how it's done. Y'all know most children want to imitate father and mother. Most children. Most sons, not all, most sons, I want to be like my father. Sometimes they can be a bad example. It don't matter to a son, I still want to be like him. Yeah, but it's not a good example. That's my dad. Or you might have it, I don't want to be nothing like him. Man, he was a good example. I don't care, I don't want to be nothing like him. So you have those. But every generation looks up. They look at where they come from. And that's order. He gives order. Because he's an Elohim of order. He's not an Elohim. He don't put his signature on anything that's confusing and out of order. That's not Yah. So with a lot of people, they have a problem with it. He says, brethren, you should covet prophecy. Covet prophesying. But in coveting prophesying, don't forbid people to speak with tongues. You might have some folks out there that has a gift of tongues. They just can't be out of order. Because he tells us before, if you're speaking, let there be an interpreter. Now, if there's not an interpreter, then what do? You do it quietly. Because he says you do it to yourself and Elohim. So in my spirit, sometimes in my spirit, I'm busting. Sometimes I feel like it up here. Because it says the spirit of the prophet is subject to the prophet. So I should be able to hold it. Man, I just want to run off. And I got a devotional tongue. I want to run off. It's subject to you. You have your prayer. Speak to Elohim. Speak to yourself and Elohim. You got your prayer line. You got your devotional. If you ain't praying, you ain't going to make it. You don't pray, we got principles. What do we say? If you don't pray, you won't stay. You don't fast, you won't. Because today's a fast day. We fasted today. Every Wednesday is a corporate fast day. We have prayer every Friday, 6 o'clock. We got to do things decently and in order. So he says, when you prophesy, but don't forbid them. I'm not forbidding anybody to do it. Let's just do it in order. Let's do it right. We could do it, just do it right. I would be amiss to stand up here and teach, then all of a sudden, hokam box, they wrote that ta. And yeah, and just started speaking and just going. I've been in class, I've seen it, where the speaker would be speaking and just bust out in tongues and stuff, and it's like, and there's no interpreter. They're not even following. He says the spirit of the prophet is subject to you. You can hold that in, and then when you have your devotional, because tongues is not for who? Oh, we better read that. We right. Right. So go up. Let's go up to where were we at? 24? Okay. Wherefore, 22. Wherefore tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe, but to them that believe not. But prophesying serveth not for them that believe not, but for them that believe. So he turns it around. He says, these tongues, they're for a sign to the believers. Tongues is, that's why he says don't forbid it. Because he goes back to Isaiah, remember? I'm going to speak to this people in tongues. No. Wherefore tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe, yet, but to them that believe not. That's what the tongues are for. For those who believe not. Those who, tongues are for, not to them that believe. So as a believer, the sign of tongues is not for me. That's what it, read that, right? Well, let's read it. Wherefore, tongues are for a sign. So tongues are a sign. Because he's getting ready to bring it out in Isaiah, or he did bring it out in Isaiah in verse 21. Wherefore, tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe. So it's not a sign to me, but to them that believe not. Yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, because a lot of people look for that as believers. As a believer, because a lot of times we would go in, do y'all speak in tongues up in here? So as a believer, you're looking for somebody to speak in tongues. But Shaul is saying that shouldn't be a sign to you. What should be a sign to you is what? Prophesying. He gets ready to say it here. So when I go into assembly, as I'm already a believer, when I go into assembly, I'm not looking for somebody to speak in tongues. I'm listening for the word. I'm listening to what? Read that prophecy and break it down to me. That's what I'm looking for, because to me, speaking in tongues is not a sign. That's what it says here, right? Wherefore tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe. So as a believer, to me, that's not a sign. As a believer, that's not a sign. But to them that believe not, y'all, because you might have some people, because you have different denominations of Christianity, and you got some who believe in tongues and some who don't. So you have in the denominations, you got some saying, well, you don't have tongues. Then you have some, oh yeah, you gotta speak in tongues. So some unbelievers would say, yeah, they're speaking in a language, and they could probably feel the ruach. There's something there. They might not be able to explain it, but they know there's something there. But for me to walk into a assembly and hear people speak in tongues, to me, that's not a sign. Does that make sense? Because sometimes Paul is, yes. Yeah. We now the initial infilling of the Ruach Hakodesh. When the Ruach fills you up, the Ruach is going to utter, and it's going to utter a heavenly language. The Ruach does that. So when how many times can you be born? You're born once. Doesn't mean that you're born once you're going to make it, because a lot of Yasharel is going to lose out. They're not going to make it. But they've been born once. You don't get, I was born, we all have our birthday. Yeah, but then I was born again. Did you come out of your mother's womb? So when we talk about birth, we have to understand what we're dealing with, because when you talk about the Holy Spirit and the speaking in tongues, that's the initial infilling of the Ruach when it gives the utterance. You're speaking more on the refilling, or how do you know when you get it? Yeah. Because it does say in the book of Acts that they were filled with the Holy Ghost again. They were filled with it again. You'll know when you have the Ruach, because you'll be subject to his Torah. You'll be subject to the word. That's when you have it. If you had a refreshing, or you were filled and then you go against Torah, you start sinning and everything, the Spirit is not going to lead you into sin. It's not going to take habitation with you if you're going to be sinning. Because he even says that, if you're going to sin, you're doing it without. Because the Holy Ghost, the Ruach, is not going to lead you into sin and cause you to be a sinner or go against his law. So when they were filled with the Ruach, because we're coming up on that, on the day of Shavuot, or the day of Pentecost, and they were initially filled, and it said the Ruach gave the utterance. You heard your voice, but it wasn't you, it was the Ruach speaking. So that's different than what we're dealing with here. So what he's dealing with here is it's just constant, it's all the time. We did see that here once before, where a young woman got filled, right? But she didn't stop. And she kept going on and on. Then she started to communicate with other people when they weren't even together in the same house. They were different parts of the city, and these people could hear her voice speaking to them. And every time she would come in here, she would have a tongue. Every time she came in here, we're witnesses. She had a tongue. Until the pastor had to put a stop to it. Stop it. Because at first he didn't see it, but after a while he's seen it and says, that's not right. That's not right. And so he had to rebuke it and get rid of it. See, there's a difference when the Spirit gives the utterance. You don't have to go through your life speaking in tongues, speaking in heavy language. You go to work. We had a brother here that would go to work and start speaking in tongues, and it didn't do no work. Do you think he kept his job? They fired him. You got to get out of here, man. Yeah, you start, because especially when you look at Shavuot, because we're going to talk a little bit more about Shavuot and what happened on Shavuot. We have to look at it because we're coming up on that. But the utterance of the Ruach is not everything, because as soon as you start speaking as the utterance of Ruach, if you're not careful, the devil will pick up on it, and he'll come back with a familiar spirit. And then you're operating in a familiar spirit. And that's what happened. Everything's done decently with order, and the spirit is subject to the prophet. Just because I'm not speaking in tongues every day doesn't mean I'm not in the ruach. For me to speak, it has to be the spirit that, and sometimes I have to, wait a minute, I have to hold, because it's subject unto me. But if you're speaking in a unknown tongue and it's just constant and you're constantly doing interrupt, that's why Shaul says, get an interpreter. So let's hear what you're saying. Because if we don't know what you're saying, well, you better be quiet. Because Shaul knew that that's what was going to happen. Because these people were doing it out of order. And that's why he used Isaiah, the 28th chapter, to speak on that. Yes. Anybody that can understand what you're saying? Okay, I'm teaching here right now. And let's say somebody stands up and just starts speaking in tongues. That would get our attention, right? If somebody's over, now, I know in the Apostolic Church, the teacher would go, "Whoo, man, I'm teaching good." Somebody starts speaking in tongues. And he almost wear it like a hat. But according to this, if somebody stands up and starts speaking in tongues, he says by course, there has to be an interpreter. If there's not an interpreter, it doesn't have to be the teacher or whatever, just as long as somebody is an interpreter. If there's not an interpreter, then they need to sit down and be quiet. Yes. There is a heavenly tongue that comes from Abba Yah. Then, and we'll see this at Shavuot, then there's tongues or languages that are intelligible. So you have, and we've seen that miracle on the day of Pentecost, they had intelligible tongues. Because, how do we know that for a fact? People were coming from all around, all these different nations that had their own native tongue, and they got to Jerusalem, and they heard those people speaking in their native tongue, and they understood it. They understood it. So if somebody, you know what would be a miracle is if, I'm just going to use you as an example. David, I'm going to use him as an example. David comes in here, he doesn't know a lick of English. All he knows is, what kind of language? Let's say, Hebrew. So he don't know a lick of English, but all he knows is Hebrew. I've been up here teaching in what language? He hears me and understands everything I've said as if I'm speaking the Hebrew language. And that's what you have on the day of Pentecost. So on the day of Pentecost, because see, Kepha he was a fisherman. He was not multilingual. He didn't get up there and start teaching on the day of Pentecost in all these different languages. He was a fisherman. He was a lowly fisherman. Probably didn't even go to, their educational system was really different. If you learned another language, you learned it at home. You didn't go to school and learn another, you learned it at home. And they knew the native Hebrew language. But when Kepha got up and spoke, he spoke one language, but everybody heard him in their language. That was the miracle. I'm speaking English. He doesn't know a lick of English. All he knows is Hebrew. And I've been teaching all this time, and he hears me in the Hebrew language. But everybody else hears me in English. And that's what it was. Because you had all these people, man, we hear them speaking in our native tongue in which we grew up, all the wonderful works of Elohim. They was probably prophesying. They were reading the prophets, talking about the prophets, and they heard them in that language. So that is the language that's intelligible to where they could understand it. Now, Shaul says he had a language where he could speak to Elohim, him and alone, Elohim, which is a heavenly language. He says that here. Let's go up to verse. Oh, I don't know. Let's go to verse 1. We'll come down a little bit. Okay, verse number 2. For he that speaketh in an unknown tongue speaketh not unto men, but unto Elohim, for no man understandeth him. Howbeit in the Ruach he's speaking mysteries. So he even tells us we should pray with an understanding, and we should sing with an understanding, so that we can understand what we're doing. If you're constantly speaking in a heavenly language, you should pray for an understanding, because if you don't understand, you might be saying, you don't know what you're saying. He that speaketh in an unknown tongue is only doing what? That's just for you. That's why, for me, that's not a sign. I'm not looking for that. Because I have an understanding that you're just edifying yourself. You're not doing that to edify me or the whole body. You're just doing it to edify yourself. But he that prophesieth, you're edifying the church. Notice what he says in verse number 5 here. I would that ye all spake with tongues, but rather that ye prophesy, verse number 5. And then let's look at some different versions of this. What time is it? Is it time? I'm about up. Huh? Okay. Verse number 5. Let's click on that and let's look at it in different versions. Verse number 5. I want to see the different versions. Let's go ahead and click on that. Okay. Yeah, if you clicked on that, then we can just go. But anyway, all right, BBE. Verse number 5. Now, though it is my desire for you all to have the power of tongues, it would give me more pleasure to be hearing the prophet's word from you. For this is a greater thing than using tongues, if the sense is not given at the same time for the good of the church, which means if there's not an edifier or an interpreter, then you're not going to edify anybody. Okay, let's go to the next version. BSB. I wish that all of you could speak in tongues, but I would rather have you prophesy. Right? Okay, let's see the English Standard Version, ESV. Let's see what it says there. Now, I want you all to speak in tongues, but even more to prophesy, because that's where the edification comes from. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go back to the King James. There was, and we kind of touched on the miracle on Shavuot, but I want to talk a little bit more about Isaiah 28 and the prophecy where Shaul gets this from, because there's some things that we can glean out of that, because none of the scriptures can be broken, and that's why Shaul used them. That's why he used them to build the kingdom. And I know there's going to be some questions, and it's good. It's good to have some questions. And I don't know. Did we get that squared away? They were hearing the music in the background. Did we get that squared away? I sure hope we did. Okay, we got it. All right. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we got it squared away. Um, I know there's going to be more questions asked on that as we get into it, but we have to, because we're coming up on that feast. And like he says here, we have to have understanding. If I'm gonna teach, I got to teach with understanding. It would do you no benefit if I got up here and spoken a language that you don't know. That would be no benefit at all. Um, so, and then when Shaul used that out of Isaiah, then we need to look at that a little closer, because when he's dealing with languages and it's dealing with prophecy, and we see that on the day of Pentecost, and it was something that they could understand, which means Torah and what was given to the Hebrews was going to be understood by all nations. Now, anybody know why he wanted all nations to understand it? Huh? There was a reason why he wanted them, and it comes from the prophets, and I'm not going to deal so much with it. On tonight. Huh? Yeah, I mean that. So, and I'll just leave this because we have to do everything with scriptures and Torah. But this is one of the reasons, and we've seen it on the day of Pentecost. But this is something, the reason why, and we'll look at it more in Isaiah 28. But in Amos, the prophet Amos, chapter 9 and verse number 9, and then there's others. Amos, chapter 9, Amos, chapter 9, and verse number 9. For lo, I will command, and I will what? Where? So it was prophesied that Yahshua, not only this, but the reason why I chose this one is because of the sifting. He perfectly designed it for Yasharel to be in all nations. So, and then if you go to the book of Acts, and it says, we hear him in our tongue, our native tongue in which we were born. So it was prophesied that Yasharel was going to be sifted into all nations, even in Deuteronomy 28. I mean, all throughout Torah, Israel was going to lose their heritage. They were going to be in every nation. When you go into every nation, over a period of time and generations, you lose your home language. You lose it. You don't speak the native language. We've been here for generations. We're totally cut off. So what did Yah do? He came by in our language. And not only here, but everywhere where Yasharel was sifted. Everywhere where they were sifted, he went to them. And so just kind of keep that in mind when we look at Isaiah 28 and we start digging into that. Isaiah 28. Yes. Yes. Well, when he talked about prophecy here, that's opening up the book of the prophets and reading. Now, are there modern day prophets? I mean, if you can prophesy on, what's going to happen in a generation or so, or even, I don't know, somebody can look into next week and prophesy? Possibly. But here, what he's dealing with here is the prophecy of the books that's written. He's not dealing with like soothsayers or people who follow the horoscope or fortune tellers. He's not dealing with that. When he's dealing with prophets and he's talking about, like he used Isaiah. They use a lot of prophets to prophesy. So a good preacher will open up the prophets and be able to break it down to you. And he says, I would rather y'all do that than to be speaking in the unknown language and nobody's edified, because really the unknown tongue it's not a sign for those who believe. And he's dealing with going up into a lot of different assemblies, and all you hear, I'm coming up here to see if y'all speak in tongues. Well, that's not a sign to me. A sign to me is if you can open up the book of the prophets and read it and break it down and share it for the edifying. Okay, Acts 1 and 6. This is why it's so important to understand prophecy. And when they therefore were come together, they asked of him, saying, Adonai, will thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Yasharel? So when you look at the prophecy is dealing with Yasharel. Otherwise, you'll get off base and think that there's somebody who replaced Yasharel. So if you don't know how to break down the prophecy and the prophets, then you're going to think somebody replaced Yasharel. And that's what they did. They did away with the book of the prophets. They did away with a lot of the teachings, and a lot of people just stayed with Shaul. All I need is Shaul's letters. I can make it in. No, I can make it in without his letters. Because Shaul encouraged you to open up the book of the prophets and to prophesy. Teach all the prophets. What does it mean with the prophets? A lot of churches, they don't want to open up the book of the prophets because it does talk about the restoration of Yasharel. But Yahusha says it's not for you to know the time of the seasons. Not right now. Right after his death, right before Shavuot, he wanted them to get the word out. You guys got to go out. Because where was Yasharel? They were scattered. We see that on the day of Pentecost. They were scattered in all these different days. He told them, y'all got to go out. This is where you have to go. Not only in Jerusalem, but in Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. You got to get this message out. Go to and tell them the good news. Tell them the good tidings. Because we think he loved the world so much. Y'all, give me about 5 more minutes? About 5 more minutes. Because when we say world, that has to be qualified. It has to be qualified when you say world. And that's what a lot of people can't do. They can't qualify that. They think world is the universe and cosmos, and that's how the Greek explained it. That's not what he was talking about when he said world. He so loved. No, you have to understand what he means by world. Psalm 7:11. Psalm 7:11. I'm going to make this real quick. Elohim judgeth the righteous, and Elohim is angry with the wicked what? So Elohim is angry every day. He's angry every day. He's angry with these folk. Oh, I thought Elohim was love and he loved the world. No. He's a judge. He's going to judge righteously, and he's angry with the wicked. So, First Yahuchanan, chapter 5, and verse 19. Let's see who he's angry at. And we know that we are of Elohim, and the whole what? And who's he angry with? All day. So if the world, he hates the world because the world is in wickedness. That's why you have to qualify when you're talking about world. You just can't say world without qualification. Because really, Elohim, he is angry at the world every day. Why? Because the world lieth in wickedness. It's a wicked world out there. He ain't happy with that. He loves you so much, he's going to destroy the world. That's how much his love is. Because he would not be right, like we read righteousness, he's a righteous judge. He would not be righteous if he let everything that's going on to continue to go on and nobody's going to be judged. He wouldn't be righteous. He has to judge on sin. That's why he's angry with the world all the day long. So when it says he loved the world, he loved Yasharel. He loved Yasharel. When he says that he loved the world, he's talking about Yasharel. He's not talking about the cosmos and everything. He's talking about Yasharel. I could spend a little bit more time on that if you want, because we could go to Isaiah, then we can go to Matthew, and we can start breaking it down a little bit more. But that's who he's dealing with, because this whole book is written to Abraham, Yishak, Jacob, and his sons, the nation of Yasharel. That's who this whole book is written to. Actually, it's a covenant between the Most High Power, Elohim, and his friend called Abraham. That's what it is. It's a covenant book that he promised all this land to Abraham and his seed. And that's why Shaul said in Galatians 3:29, that's why he says, if you are in the Mashiach, then are ye Abraham's seed and what? Heirs. We stand to inherit. Inherit what? Everything he promised Abraham. And he didn't promise Abraham a lounging couch up in the Shamayim. That's not what he promised. He promised Abraham this land. He even told him what the land was. Because they're going to occupy and have that land and build the kingdom, and it's going to be peace for 1,000 years. Then if you qualify to make it to what we call heaven, but it's actually a city, if you qualify to take up residency in that city, the city doesn't come down until after the 1,000 years of peace, and there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. After he makes that new heaven and new earth, then you see the city that they call Shamayim, and it comes down, and he talks about the beauty of it and the glory of it. But you got to make it through the 1,000 years of peace before you even see that or take up residence in that. So there's a timeline to everything. Everything has to be done decently and in order. So does that mean, because then you go to the next question, does that mean Gentiles can be? Oh, no, there's a plan for Gentiles too. There's going to be nations here. When it says we're going to reign as kings and priests for 1,000 years, who are you going to reign over? There's going to be other nations. There's going to be nations that you get to reign over. You know, that he's bringing in, because we kind of talked about that the other day, right? In Amos, where he says he's going to build again the house of Daud, because they brought that out in Acts chapter 15, right? Because Shaul went to the Gentiles and said, why are you going to the Gentiles? And then they came together and they had that council. Then it was revealed. Jacob, who they call James, who was over the council in Jerusalem, it came to him at that time. This is what the prophet Amos meant when he says he's going to rebuild the tabernacle of Daud. And he quotes out of Amos, the 8th chapter, right? Or the 9th chapter of Amos. I think it's the 9th chapter. I think Amos 8 he's dealing with the famine. He's sending out a famine, and it's not famine of food or water. It's of the word of Elohim. And like Yahusha said, you got to live by every word of it. So the famine of the word, because they don't want to open up the prophets. They don't want to open up Moses. They don't want to open up they don't want to open that up. They don't want that. All they want is Shaul's letters. He says there's going to be a famine for the word of Elohim. Okay, so I'm going to end it there. My time is up. Thank you for staying with me. Those who are online, appreciate you. Thank you for your patience and putting up with me and my style of teaching. I know it'd probably be better to have slides, PowerPoint. If I could do that, I probably would, do more of that. But I want to stay in Torah, so that's what I teach is Torah. But I know some people they like that art and that visual because it tends to stay with them a little longer. Y'all do know that they want to ban the Bible. Yeah.